Good evening, VC. Dave here. Um, gonna respond to Noble Records 750 subscribers contest this evening. Um, so I think I had maybe 30, maybe a little less in the way of subscribers. Ended up getting a shout out from Teddy at Eat Sleep Vinyl, and I think I'm now at as a result of that somewhere around over 150. So wouldn't be there without Teddy's stamp of approval. So it's much appreciated. And so thinking about 750, man, that's a lot of that's a lot of subscribers, man. Congratulations. So contest, man, 5 questions. So yeah, a lot to go over, a lot to show. I've got some stories to tell. May have told a few of these in the past. So yeah, if you've heard them before, so be it. So the first question is, what is your first memory with vinyl? And so for me, I've got to go back as far as my first memory I'm going to give is for my first 7-inch record that I bought. Because it has a lot of significance. So, was going to Fredonia State at the time up in New York, and we had a little campus center that would have shows, and some damn good ones too. We'd get a lot of good bands to come through and play at the school. Screaming Trees, man, I can go on. There was just a ton of good stuff. But this band played out of New York City. Hadn't heard of them, and a friend was like, "Man, you need to see this band. It's called Verses, and 3-piece. And you've got the brothers Balliot in this band, Ed on drums, and Richard on vocal and guitar, and on bass, the lovely Fontaine Taups. And man, I think that was the first time I had ever seen live a woman in a rock band, and man, she was killing it. And I was impressed. I think I fell in love, maybe, Jesus. But after the show, and it was a killer show, she's at the merch table selling all their stuff, and went up, and I was like, dang, very cool 7-inch, the Frog from Verses here, and got her to autograph this here, Fontaine Taups, and she was wearing a white fur coat, and man, she was smoking hot. It was over. I bought everything they had, including the 7-inch. So, yeah, killer stuff. Love this band. Have followed them since. I've got a few of their other records here to show. This is during their time on Teen Beat. This is The Stars Are Insane. Phenomenal record. I have the CD as well. This is from '94. Man, guitar driven, great vocals, great songwriting. The song Thera that opens this record is absolutely badass. If you don't know about this band, they've been around a long time. They played for a long time. Got back together a few years ago. Still playing gigs when they get presented with an opportunity in New York. So yeah, great record there. I also have on vinyl Dead Leaves, which they put out after The Stars Are Insane. Also on Teen Beat. And this is basically a compilation of early recordings from '92, around that time mainly. And highly recommend this record as well from Verses. So the second question, what is the first album I fell in love with? That's a very easy question for me. I was 8 years old, so this was 1981, And my mom's best friend was Tina Willis, and her son was my best friend, Brian Willis. And always spent a lot of time over at his place. And at the time, I was only allowed to listen to country music growing up where I was living. I grew up on a farm, so it was all about Waylon Jennings for me. And yeah, that was the meat of my music diet. And because that's all our parents would let us listen to. So, and especially for Brian. And I went over, and he jumped out of the trailer and grabbed me and said, let's go to the hedgerow. So we ran out in the hedgerow, and he pulled out a little tape player, the old school, with the one speaker, and you pop the tape in. And he had two cassettes. He had AC/DC Back in Black, and he had Rush Moving Pictures. And it's a shame I don't have the vinyl. I had the CD. I actually had the entire Rush collection on CD, but I sold it. But I still have this cassette. And it's the first time I really ever heard rock and roll. And yeah, just at Tom Sawyer, and then Red Bargetta, Limelight. I mean, these songs absolutely had a huge impact on me. And yeah, I was hooked on music ever since, and have spent my whole life involved with music. So I have my friend Brian, who risked his life at the age of 8, to thank for that, because if he would have got caught with these cassettes, his dad would have beat him upside the head with the belt. So yeah, that's definitely the first album I fell in love with. As far as the first album I had on vinyl that I fell in love with would be this album, Tool, Enema, when I really started getting into buying records. This is on original from '96 on Zoo Entertainment, double LP. Great story I have about Tool. They were on tour. If I recall, it was Lollapalooza, and the big amphitheater here in Charlotte. They were one of the headliners, and there was a guy I was hanging out with at the time when I was in my old band, Jarvis, and I forget his name now. But he worked at the Pavilion. It was Blockbuster Pavilion at the time. It's gone through a few names. And his job that day was to take decibel level readings of the bands that were playing on stage. And if they went over 100, then he had to radio up onto stage to get the band to either turn down or get the sound engineer to do an adjustment or what have you, and get the decibels down. Yeah, not something you really, you want bands just to play how they want to play, but, part of the deal. So I was hanging with him, and, most of the bands, and, I think it was Julian Marley, or I forget, one of the Marleys was there, and, all that's fine and whatnot. And then Korn comes out, and they were at, I think 90, 98 decibels, something like that. So they were good to go. Good show. And then Tool comes out, and they open with Stinkfist, which is my absolute favorite song off this record. And they're at like 120 decibels, just annihilating, and it's absolutely badass. And at the end of the song, that dude had to radio up onto the stage for them to turn down. And you saw the bass player reach down and make an adjustment on his bass pedal. And when they kicked into the next song, they were right at 100, 101 decibels. I think it might have kicked to 103 for a little bit, but they weren't at 120. So I told them, dude, leave them alone, and they were good to go for the rest of the show, and it was absolutely amazing. And I got this record then, and yeah, so that's the first, probably LP I fell in love with, that I owned. So, question 3: what record have I spent the most money on? All right, and that was recently, on my pilgrimage to the Holy Land, the Mecca here in North Carolina, known as Carolina Soul, up in Durham. What an amazing operation. Very small store, but I spent 4 hours digging in that store. Went through all the 7-inches, the soul and jazz 7-inches, found some rare jazz 7-inches, stuff you're just simply maybe only going to find at a place like Carolina Soul. But I pulled a few records off the wall. So a Duke professor in April of this year had brought in her entire rare free jazz collection. And there was only 2 pieces of that collection left, of the hundreds of records, I guess, that she had brought in. So I was very late to the party, but was very stoked to grab this record. That is the Pharoah Sanders Quintet. This is an original on ESP disc, U.S. press. I believe this is from 65 when this was released. It was recorded in 64. Pharoah Sanders on sax, Stan Foster on trumpet, Jane Getz on piano, William Bennett on bass, and Marvin Patillo on percussion. And this is an amazing free jazz record. One of my all-time favorite pieces of jazz music here. Just absolutely love this record. And yeah, I wasn't leaving it behind. It was $120. So it was fairly priced for the rarity. So I was happy to grab that. But that's definitely the most I've spent on a record, and I rarely go over $30. I mean, that's my rule. So a record like that, though, the rule gets broken. So the next question, which is question 4, what album has had a great significance to me? So the reason I got into jazz is a friend of mine in Alabama, Greg Krill. He was always into jazz, and got to go back into the early 90s. When Napster came out, he was in the basement of his apartment in A-Town, some apartments here in Charlotte, near UNC Charlotte, and he downloaded as many jazz records as he could for free, because jazz records, as we all know here in the VC, are not cheap, especially for originals. And he was a big Miles Davis guy, big John Coltrane guy, of course, but a lot of other musicians, and so he compiled some 200 albums, and I always thought that was interesting, and but I hadn't really paid attention to jazz too much. And then we went to New York City on a trip and got to visit Birdland. It's named after Charlie Parker, of course, a great sax player. And we saw an amazing band there. Wish I could remember the name. I've tried to go back and research who it was. I know I have the date when we were there, but I haven't been able to find any information on the internet on that. But the drummer was in his 80s, man, and he was something else. Yeah, piano and sax. It was an amazing show. But I reached out to him a few years back, and was like, man, I've heard some things, and I need to start exploring. And he gave me a list to start with, and started first listening, and then finding these records. So it's kind of what started this whole thing, and then led me to the vinyl community, and Teddy and Kieran and all the great jazz guys that are on here. And one of the first records I got, and this has made a huge impact on where my collection has gone, and you know, yeah, kind of like Teddy said, the pebbles in the pond. And that's the John Coltrane Quartet, Crescent. This is, of course, the amazing lineup: McCoy Tyner on piano, Jimmy Garrison on bass, Alvin Jones on drums, Lonnie's Lament on side 2 is one of the most beautiful songs in existence. Yeah, this album here, and then of course, you branch out. You look at Alvin Jones and the albums he did as a band leader. You look at McCoy Tyner and the Impulse releases, the Milestone releases, the Blue Note releases, and it takes you from there, and then you branch out with the musicians on those records, and soon enough you've got an amazing jazz collection. So that was a very, very significant record. And then the last question, number 5, your ultimate Grail record. Oh, I don't know. I didn't really prepare for this one as well. I've got a few records that I consider holy grails. I've got one here that I'll show, that I've shown before. And I definitely I've got my want list whittled down pretty low, as I mentioned in my last video, down to 50, 60 records. And there's definitely a few on there that are grails. Very, very, very hard to find. If you find them, they're $300 or $300 or more. You might get lucky and find one in trash condition for $150 or something. But I know one record's the Shintaro Quintet from Japan. Very rare record. I think there's usually only ever one floating around in Japan available. So you have to buy a plane ticket for it. And then the other probably be another released in Japan would be Don Cherry Blue Lake. And I've only ever seen that record shown once. Lavelle up in Chicago area has that record. That's one I'd really, really love to find. Just a beautiful, beautiful record. So yeah, as it seems there's a theme there, and that would be Japan. And I do have the Max Roach Quartet Namo on the Victor label. This is definitely a holy grail. And this is a promo copy, so makes it even rarer. Yeah, you've got Cecil Bridgewater on trumpet, Billy Harper on tenor, one of the most amazing sax players ever. Reggie Workman on bass, and of course the amazing Max Roach on drums. This is just one track spread over 2 sides. Man, this was recorded for Swiss Radio in 1976, and is an absolute masterpiece in every sense. And it's Namo Max Roach Quartet, and very happy to have that record. Had a few people in the VC reach out to me. Bill, I believe he's landed a copy, a promo, recently. Took him a while to find one, but he's got one on the way from Japan. I hope it arrives safe. So very, very excited for him to find that record. So there's a lot of people in the VC that definitely appreciate the rarity and the beauty of that record. I believe I learned about it from Teddy and Eat Sleep Vinyl. But so yeah, that's gonna be my entry into the contest. And man, yeah, I hope to run into you soon, man. At one of your pop ups. I got to tell you that Slipknot story. Peace.